Tonight, we concluded chapter 35 and went into 36, the chapter on redemption. And we spilled the secrets. What does this mean? What is this mystery of Mashiach? We are finishing chapter 35. We're at the end of chapter 35. So we have one more thought.
Could you give a mini chazara? Sorry.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
So what we were discussing was the idea, this entire chapter was really answering two questions. The first question was, why is the verse that is the foundation of the entire first section of Tanya, the entire 53 chapters, the thing is very near to you in your mouth and in your heart to do it. And we explained that order, mouth, heart to do it, doesn't work. And why is it written that way? And over the course of the chapter, we understood. Because that's the whole point. That's the bottom line. Yes, in our mouth, what we're saying, what we're feeling, in our heart, what we're thinking, what we're feeling. But the bottom line is to do it. Action. This entire chapter was saying the supremacy of action, even over emotion, even over Torah study, even over the godliness of the soul herself, the supremacy of action as creating the fuel that will maintain the flame of God on the wick of man. Which also answered, and I'm glad Sarah asked the question because it's nice to sort of look back at where we came from to understand what we've accomplished, which also answered the other question we were asking. And we said, if you remember, and if you don't, that's perfectly legit, it's been a while. But the other question we asked was, why is my soul stuck in my animal soul? Like, what a painful position. Soul with an animal soul, with a body. For a person who we call a tzaddik, a very holy person, who's going to transform, completely destroy the evil inside of him. And he's going to take that animal energy and use it to serve God. We understand why the godly soul is within the animal. It makes perfect sense. The animal is now going to be subsumed in the God energy. The animal is going to be helping the godly soul serve God, like the man riding on the horse, racing away. But that's not the story of everyone else. That's not even the story of the aspiration of this book, the Benoni, the person who's perfect in his thought and his speech and his feelings and his action, but he's still not eradicating his inner evil. He's still not transforming his animal to serve God. So why does a godly soul have to be within the animal? That's what's the point? It seems like just a waste and painful. Well, over this chapter, through everything we discussed, we came to understanding that. Because actually, the godly soul uses the animal as the vehicle to reach the body. So yes, the godly is within the animal, and that's great news. Because every time the godly soul is impacting the body, and you're thinking for God, speaking for God, feeling for God, doing for God, that's the godly, through the animal, transforming the body, and the animal is part of the process. And that was the final crescendo of this chapter, that we're actually bit by bit transforming that animal. We didn't think we could. We didn't think we have the power. But bit by bit, we're actually taking that animal energy and making it part of serving God. So it's amazing. It's a waste. It's painful. It's an amazing gift that we can actually use the animal to serve God. That was, in very brief, what we were discussing in this chapter. And now we're at the end, which is really, we ended last week. Like, we were done. We answered both our questions. I mean, the Rebbe went back and said, here are the answers to the questions, but thank you, Sarah, for asking. So we got them. We reviewed them. The ideas were hopefully super clear. What's left? What's left is actually responding to a question of a skeptic. Now, sometimes throughout Tanya, we see the Alter Rebbe answering the skeptic, meaning the Alter Rebbe understands what this person might be thinking and sometimes graciously lets him know the answers. Of course, if a skeptic just wants to be skeptical, you could say, what's the point? So I guess this must be a skeptic that actually has a sincere desire to know, because if you have a desire to know, I'd like to answer. If you just want to stay in your question, I'm wasting my breath or my ink or my pen. Usually the answers to those questions are found in the side notes. Sometimes they're in the body of the text in parentheses. That's fairly rare. Even more rare is what we're about to read, which is in the body of the text, there's not even parentheses, which would imply that this is pretty good knowledge for all of us to have, pretty much something that will help all of us in understanding a point in this chapter, which maybe we can discuss after we read it. So let's read to see what question someone might be wondering. Not us, but someone. So we're on page 90, the second line. V'hine, kol b'chinas hamshachas or hashchina, she b'chinas gilui or ensof baruch hu, eina nikra shina chas v'shalom bo yisbar, below riboy. So throughout this chapter, we've been discussing the concept of the drawing down of the infinite light of God's oneness. Remember, throughout the chapter, we use this term hashra'as hashchina, which we said meant the revelation of the oneness of God. And that explanation was very significant to the chapter, because only since we're talking about really the oneness of God, do you understand why, if there's any self, it doesn't work at all. And that's why your feelings don't create this, aren't the magnet for this, because feelings have self. Your Torah study doesn't do this. Your Torah study is too remote from your body to do this. Your soul doesn't do this. Your soul also has self. But the action, selfless, nothing to do with you. This is done because this is God's will. That allows God's absolute oneness to be revealed. Because there's no barrier, there's no separation. I'm not taking up space. I'm doing this because His will. I wouldn't on my own think to do any of this. So it's not me, it's Him. So now His absolute oneness could be, and my action can become part of that oneness. Like we explained, like the fuel becomes part of the flame, my action becomes part of that revelation of God. So we have constantly throughout this chapter, you do this physical action, that's a commandment, you draw down the oneness of God. And you do that action, you draw down the oneness of God. And if I do an action, I'm also drawing down the oneness of God. And if she's doing action, she's also drawing down the oneness of God. So we have a lot of oneness of God that are being drawn down, hopefully, all the time, all over this world. And a person could say, wait a minute, does this imply there's a multiplicity to the oneness of God? Does this imply there's a change in the oneness of God? Now it's revealed, now it's here, before it wasn't. So I'm changing God's oneness. And it's in many different places simultaneously. So there's a multiplicity of God's oneness. So the Rebbe says, of course not. This does not in any way imply any change, God forbid, in God, and any multiplicity, God forbid, in God. Neither is implicit in saying that every time we do the action of the commandment, we draw down, which might imply change, the oneness of God, which might imply multiplicity. No, no change. Nope, no multiplicity. And this is an ancient question, the Rebbe says. Where do we see a source for this? Kedisa b'Sanhedrin. This same question was raised in the Talmud, Sanhedrin. That was a long time ago. The Amar le hahu mina l'Rabban Gamliel, that min, that apikaris, that very, very intense skeptic, said to Rabban Gamliel, Amrisi Gol be a sarch sharia. You say that on every assemblage of 10, the divine presence rests. Do you think he's going to continue? Well, how many divine presences do you have? Every time there's 10 of us, here comes God, and there comes God, and there comes God. How many gods do you have? That was the question. Now, it was a question we're being told of a min. A min doesn't just mean someone who has a question, someone who's confused. It doesn't even just mean a skeptic. Probably, commonly, we could say a heretic, meaning someone who has really denounced or renounced a belief in God. But he's at this point where he's asking a question, and Rabbi Gamliel chose to give him an answer. So I guess there was room for him to hear, or other people that would hear the question should know the answer. So Rabbi Gamliel responded, "V'heshiv lo mashal." Rabbi Gamliel responded with a parable, with a metaphor. Me'or hashemesh, from the light of the sun. We use a lot of light of the sun parables throughout Tanya, throughout Hasidic thought. Hanichnas b'chalonos rabim chulei. That the light of this one sun is entering many, many, many windows. V'hamaskil yavin. And the intelligent person is going to understand. So what are we saying here? So the Rebbe is saying, now again, I wasn't bothered by this, I wasn't bothered by this, but obviously some people learning this are going to be bothered, because that's why the Rebbe is responding. And as we said, it's in the body of the text without even parentheses, because it's something also that's relevant to us to understand what's happening here. So every time you do the action of the commandment, the oneness of God is revealed. Am I changing God by that? No, we don't change God. God was always here. He was here before the action. He'll be here after the action. In every molecule of this world is God energy. If it wasn't, it wouldn't be. So what's happening? What's the great thing of doing this action if you're saying there's no change going on? The change is that we can receive it. If we look at that parable, the metaphor that Rabbi Gamliel gave, I'm going to stretch it a little bit more or not to explain both angles, because there Rabbi Gamliel was referring to the multiplicity issue, but it really also is speaking to the question of, is there a change? So here you have this beautiful sun, 90 million miles away from us, and your windows are closed, and they're dark out windows, and you have no clue what's going on. It's Chicago in February. Do you think it's 60 degrees outside like they're claiming? What's going on? You have no clue. Open the windows, open the shades. So you open your curtains, you open your shades, you draw your blinds, and this beautiful sunlight comes in, a miraculous day in Chicago in January. So did I just change the sun? That sun 90 million miles away? Was it changed when I drew open my curtains? I don't think anyone thinks that. But before there was no sunlight in this room, and now there is, so I must have changed the sun. Not exactly. You open the curtains, and the light that was there can now shine through. So similarly, God is here. Where is here? Everywhere. Every single speck of existence in the entire Milky Way galaxy is God. He is here wherever here is. But not only is he here, we need him to be absorbable by us. You can think if there's some very common minerals in the earth. They're there, they're common, but they're expensive because we don't always have the ability to absorb them. And sometimes we need exactly a certain formula or with some other supplement that helps us absorb what's here, but not in a fashion we can take in. So for us to be affected, for the light of God to shine on the wick of man, we need to do the action of the commandment. And then the God who is here, now the energy is revealed. Now it's affecting me. Now I'm taking it in. Now I drew open those windows. I drew the shades. Did I change God? Did I change the sun? And of course, for the same reason, Rabbi Gamliel is saying, and if there were 1 million homes at the same time, or scattered all over this side of the globe, and they all opened their windows, they all pulled up their blinds, they all now have sunlight shining in, are there many suns? So the light of the sunlight is illuminating house after house after house, and there's one sun. So with every action done by every single person, there's about 15 million Jews in the world today. Imagine how beautiful all of us, happen at the same time, 15 million of us, to do the action of a commandment. How happy God would be to shine the light in all 15 million hearts and minds. And that's not a multiplicity. And that's not a change. So this concept, which again, I think is fairly obvious, and of course you could go deeper into it, but I think it's a fairly obvious concept, is really helping all of us understand better the dynamics of what's going on, which is why I assume it's not on a side note, and it's not even parenthetical, though it is coming officially to answer the question of this skeptic. And of course, we use the concept of light here, the sun and the light of the sun. Well, that was the metaphor of Rabbi Gamliel, but it's really used because it's a very great example, so to speak, of God's relationship with us. Meaning, God is giving us. And that giving, very often in Hasidic thought, is compared to the sun and the rays of the sun in many, many different ways. Throughout Tanya, you'll find it. Throughout other Hasidic works, you'll find it. There's a reason we use that metaphor. Another metaphor that we don't use as frequently would be like a teacher-student. So the sun illuminates with the rays, and the teacher pours on the student knowledge. So that also should be like a good God-us metaphor. But it doesn't work for a very significant reason, which we just alluded to in our question. That was a hint. Thinking of the question that the skeptic raised, that the Rebbe is responding to, can you think why we would not use the teacher-student metaphor and we prefer the sun-rays metaphor? Anyone could see something about the teacher-student that would not jive well. Of course, there are probably many things. But think of what I just said was the question of the skeptic, and then think, why would the teacher-student not be a great metaphor for God and us? Something very important that the Rebbe just raised in this question. You'll impress all of us.
Well, I would think that the sun, when you give the sun example, then it shines not only on one person, but on the entire world. A teacher can affect only that child. Does it make sense?
Okay, it could, but of course you could be a teacher of thousands. Okay, Nechama said that the teacher's words can be interpreted in different ways. The sun is pretty consistent. That's good too. Think back to the question of the skeptic, right? How many gods do you have? Or as we said, is there a multiplicity of God? Is there a change in God? And then think of the teacher-student versus the sun and the sunlight and us receiving that sunlight. What would be the advantage of the sun over the teacher if we think of those aspects of the question, which are very significant in understanding God? Anybody else? Anyone think of anything else? The question was, is there a change in God?
There's millions of teachers. There's millions of teachers. There's one God. There's one sun.
Oh, okay. That's good too. Teacher is limited. That's for sure. The limitation. Well, I mean, so is the sun ultimately. I was thinking about the idea of change. A teacher, any teacher, and for sure a good teacher, is changed by his students. And a teacher is, in a sense, limited to his students. Not, of course, the teacher has limitations just as the sun has limitations, but a teacher, though of course maybe some could try, but it's really hard to teach if there's absolutely no student that showed up for class. If I came on and there's not one person on the Zoom, I don't think I would give the class that day. I mean, you could say, well, I should because it's being recorded, but I don't know. I think I would call it a pass. A teacher teaches when there's a student, ideally a student who wants to learn. And however much the student wants to learn, that's what's going to draw out from the teacher to teach. And as the teacher teaches, they're changed by the experience. Very often, I can teach this many, many, many times. And hopefully each time I gain a new understanding based on my students questions, thoughts, reflections, examples. Oh, hopefully each and every time is another aha moment on something that officially I know quite well. But each time you're teaching, there's an interaction between you and the students, and there's a change in you. So the teacher, and of course, yes, the teacher's part. The teacher is only going to teach of their students. The teacher, his teaching is limited or based on the student's abilities. And the teacher changes with the students. The sun shines if they're recipients or not. The sun's 90 million miles away. It's not shining because we would like a nice day out in Chicago. The sun's light is not affected by our abilities to appreciate sunlight or not. If we're sleeping, if we're tuned in, if we're spaced out. Remember once there was this ad series, it's a gorgeous day outside. Why aren't you inside watching TV? Or something like that. Like whatever's going on, we're inside, we're outside, we're wanting it, we're appreciating it. The sun continues to shine, oblivious. And the sun's not impacted by our appreciation, response, desire. It's got nothing to do with us. So that dimension is very, very, very significant. Because all of those teacher limitations imply the changing, the morphing nature of the teacher by the students. And there's that level of God, that's God, beyond anything we do. Yes, God has invested in us enormous power. And when we do right, it really lifts him, it gives him. And when we do wrong, it really pains him, it really hurts him. For the end of the day, there's that part of God beyond any of us. And there has to be, for him to be God. And therefore, the sun metaphor is what's preferred, what's usually used in the Hasidic lexicon when we're talking about this flow from God to us over the flow of a teacher to a student, which of course, as many of you raised other issues with it as well, the mortal dimension, the limitation dimension. Obviously, there's many things that were raised here, and they're all valid in the limitations of that metaphor. And that's why we don't usually find Hasidus using them if we want to speak about God and his relationship to us. And with that, we finish the chapter. Hopefully, it was a very practical chapter. The bottom line is very obvious. Rejoice in the action. Don't feel, it's just an action. Rejoice. The flame of God, the revelation of the oneness of the God on my body right now by this concrete act of service. And this flows directly into chapter 36. 35, 36, 37 is what I would view as one subsection of Tanya. Why? Because 36 talks about Mashiach. So how does that connect to 35? Because we're going to understand the Altar's perspective on how we, action by action, transform ourselves, transform the world, and create the reality of redemption. And that's why 35 leads into 36, which leads into 37. And then we'll get to 38, we'll speak all about intention. So now let's begin chapter 36. Behine, behold, Moda'asos Maimar Razal, it's known to all, the saying of the sages, Shetachlis Brias Olam Hazeh, that the purpose, most existential purpose of the creation of the world, of this world, is that God desired a home in this lower dimension. This is a foundational understanding of the significance of redemption, of Mashiach. Why is Mashiach so important? Like, maybe we overemphasize it a bit. There's many things God wants from us. The Mashiach is definitely on the list. But maybe we shouldn't be, making it such a huge priority, be all, end all. It's a piece. It's part of the foundations of our faith, but there are others. Also says no. How did you understand what the sages say? The sages say in 4 places that the purpose of creation, the essence purpose of creation is God desired a home in the lower realm. In other words, Mashiach. Now, there are other answers given by the sages. This is obviously a question that is pondered. Why did God create? What did he want? What was the purpose? And there are other answers given. But this one is the essence answer, given 4 times. This is the critical core of all the reasons. If we come to the very, very core, but why God desired a home in the lower realm. So that phrase, that God desired a home in the lower realm, is very significant. It's the foundation of our whole understanding of redemption. So let's unpack it a little. We got 3 key words there. God desired a home in the lower realm. So let's try to look at these words and understand what our sages saying. God desired. What does the word desire connote? Why do you think the term desired is used?
Isn't it that he desired before he created the world? So the desire was before the creation of the world.
Yes, the desire is the reason for the creation. So what I'm saying is, why do you think the sages use the term desire? Nit'aveh, desire.
Nit'aveh.
Why are we calling this a desire? What does a desire imply? We have a taiva. What do we mean? Well, what do we mean when we justify something by calling it a desire? What does that imply? What can we not say about it? What are we not going to say about it? A lack. Oh, that's very nice. Okay, so Nechama said a desire means you're lacking something and that's why you desire it. That's a very beautiful point. So desire implies a lack. I like that. Anything else that desire would imply? So God did not have a home. So he wanted one. That's why we want homes, by the way, because that's what he craves. And Nechama is saying you create it because you don't have it. That's very true. Anybody else? Any other implications in the idea of desire? Why that's the specific word choice? God desired a home in the lower realm?
Because it's beyond like a reason. Like it's just a desire. Give your intellectual explanation. It's just what you want. It's beyond reason. Maybe.
Yes. Yes. That's a very, very critical point, what Froma just said. And Chava added that desire doesn't mean something you need, which is also a very good point. I think everything that was said is very, very, very good, pulling this all together. So Nechama is saying a desire means he's missing something. Same time, Chava is saying we think of a desire as like, it's not he needed a home in the lower realm, he desired it. And I think that's a very good point, because if we said needed, it would imply a deficiency in God. How could God have a need, but he can have a desire? But Nechama is saying, but it's something that he's lacking. Yes, but not in lacking the realm of a need, but lacking the realm of a desire, because if he didn't lack it, he wouldn't desire it. And Froma is saying, very correctly, that a desire, when we desire things, it generally means something that we can't rationally justify. Because if we could, it wouldn't be a desire. Maybe it might go back to Chava's point of the need versus the desire. If I can rationally justify it, then I need it. That's why I can explain away why I have to get it. But a desire means it's not coming from a place of reason, which is very profound in terms of understanding God, because reason and intellect is like the highest dimension of expression. But then there's deeper dimensions than that, deeper than expression, which is really just that like self, what you desire, what you have pleasure in, what you will, and all those are actually deeper than your intellectual justifications. So not being able to intellectually justify, not calling it a need. We don't want to think of God as needy, but at the same time also Not calling it a need because that would be something you have intellect. Here's just a very deep, inexplicable for sure to us. Like, why does he want this? I don't know. That's why we're calling it a desire. But he wants it. Well, what does he want? He wants a home. I'm sure many of us at various points have wanted a home because God wants a home. So God wants a home. Now, what does a home mean for God? He wants a home. So to strip the word away from its physical limitations, does he want a ranch house? Does he want a Georgian, a condo? He wants a home. What does a home connote? Why are sages saying a home? What does a home mean? Belonging.
Comfortable for the right reasons.
Comfortable for the right reasons. We got belonging, comfortable, both of which are going in the same correct direction. Anyone else? Any other ideas on what a home will connote? I mean, I'm sure many of us have heard this many times. God wants a home here. So bring Mashiach. Give God his primordial desire. Give him a home. What do you mean by give him a home?
I think it's a place we can be most ourselves. We can just be whoever we are, not like as pretentious and trying be something for anybody, but just sort of like, kick your shoes off and just be yourself.
Be yourself. Exactly. So what Sarah said and what Nechama said and what Fruma said is all the same point in different words. It's all revolving around the same very significant idea of a home. So we all got it because we know what it means to be home. Nechama said it's a place of what you're belonging. This is you. This is your place. And that's why Sarah said you can be comfortable. As Fruma said, you take off your shoes. You don't need to have your makeup. You don't have to have jewelry. You might be covering your hair in a more different way than a wig. It's your home. So a home means it's yours, which is the idea of the belong, the idea of the comfort, the idea of you could be yourself. From a said, you don't have to be pretentious. You don't have to be something else. Your home means you are able to express yourself completely. No barriers, no filters. You. Because this is your place. It's got to be one place in the world that you can just be yourself. You don't have to be concerned about being yourself. Hopefully that's a good self coming out. You could be yourself. You could be relaxed. You could be comfortable. It's where you belong. It's yours. So the home being yours has a connotation of permanence as versus a place you're renting, an Airbnb. This is yours. So there's a certain permanence, a certain solidity in your home. And the home means you can be yourself. Comfortable, belonging, shoes off, you're yourself. You're completely freely expressing yourself. That's what God wants. Unpacking that and talking of God, God's home means a permanent revelation of essence. You can be yourself. It's yours. It's your home. So God has a desire higher than reason. Not a need, not a lack, but still having something he wants that he doesn't have. Why? Who knows? It's a desire for a home, for a permanent, as a home is, revelation of himself. As we're all coming to an understanding what it means a home. And he's very specific. Of course, we know in real estate, everything is location, location, location. So God knows that too. Why do you think we think that way? God has a very specific location in mind. In the lower realm. In the lower realm. The lower realm is this physical reality. Meaning there's all the upper realms. Upper realms, as we know, it is 4 spiritual worlds. Each of the 4 subdivide into myriads. And there's many, many dimensions higher than those, beyond those 4 spiritual worlds in our little solar system in this end of the galaxy. And then there's the lowest dimension. Physicality. Planet Earth. Us. So God has this desire. Again, desire means it's inexplicable. It's not something we're going to rationally understand. Desire for a permanent revelation of self. Now, the Alter Rebbe, as we continue reading, is not focusing on the word desire that we just unpacked. He's not focusing on the word home that we just unpacked. What he's going to focus on is that final term, in the lower realm. God desires a home in the lower realm. What do you think is going to be the question that the Alter Rebbe will raise on this desire for a home in the lower realm? Why does that in the lower realm strike such a questioning note? God desires a home, and saying God desires a home in the lower realm. How did we just shift that desire? What does that mean now?
And I kind of think my connotation of like what I envision as God, which is very limited, but I think that, you know, he's aloof and above and beyond this world. And it would feel like would be more comfortable up in a more spiritual place than this kind of like unspiritual place. But I don't know. It's
Okay,
like just
that's a good question. So Frum was phrasing her question, because I'm saying there's a question. So what's the question? So Frum is saying, God wants to be here. I would think he'd rather have a home on planet Atzilus. He'd rather be in some very celestial realm, very rarefied, very godly, and not down here in the physicality of planet Earth. Like here he wants his home in the mud with us. You can have your home with the angels, higher than the angels. Why aren't down here? That's a great question. Anyone else can think of any questions on God's desire, which again, his essence desire is beyond our questioning, but we're nitpicking the details, that he wants to have his home in the lower realm with us, planet Earth. Anyone have any other questions on that besides what Fruma raised, which is an excellent point?
Could it be because he wants to be in the lower world, but the world has to be a comfortable place for God to dwell? And in order for that to happen, the people have to serve God and perform the mitzvahs and the actions in order to make it a comfortable place. So it's sort of like a circle. And that if everybody is performing their service to God properly and following the commandments and doing mitzvahs, then it'll be a much more comfortable place for God, and it will illuminate this lower world even more.
And conversely, if people are not, then what would happen, Lisa?
Well, I would like to say monkey see, monkey do.
Okay.
But we know that that isn't always a reality on our planet.
Okay, I hear that. So in essence, you're almost echoing Fruma's question with some different details, but in a sense, you're saying, you really want to be here, God? That's going to be a big stretch. Because to be here, again, a home means you're comfortable. A home means you're exposed. A home means you're kicking off your shoes and revealing yourself. And like, we got to be on level for you to reveal yourself to us. It would be a lot easier to reveal yourself on planet Atzilus, the highest world, so high we don't barely have an angel, we don't barely have a soul. There we could see God stretching out. Here, specifically in this world, is it going to be comfortable for you? Is this going to feel like home? Anyone else? So Frum and Lisa, in different ways, from different angles, are sort of circling around the same idea, which is a very valid question. Anyone else have any other questions on this whole God wants a home here? On that here. Anyone else have?
Why can't he make it comfortable for himself without us?
Oh, so you're getting deeper. You're not asking why does he want it here? You're saying, God, if you really want a home, feel free. You know, no one's stopping you. You're God. Do it. And that, of course, is a very good question, Nechama. And that's not on the specific wording of in the lower realm. That's on the whole package deal, which, of course, the Alter Rebbe didn't say, but we know implicit, especially following chapter 35, action, make a change, action, reveal God. We sort of know somewhere along the lines is going to come our responsibility to make this happen. And the Chama is saying, parenthetical to our question, if you really want a home, there's a lot of prefab models. Like, what do you need us for? And that's a very true and very deep and very real question. And in a sense, we can go back to, so I'm going to answer it. The Alter Rebbe does not deal with that question at all in this chapter of Tanya, but it's a great question, discussed in obviously many other places. And in a sense, there's different ways to answer. I'm going to give you one. There's more than one answer to that very deep question. Obviously, yes, God does not need our help to make his home, but he does, because that's how he set up the world, that he does need our help for him to have a home. But then why did he set up the world that way? Why did he do that to himself? To be relying on us? Come on, he could have found someone more reliable but us. And look, we've been schlepping for 5,783 years. My gosh, that's a long time to wait for your house. So you could view it as God's love for us. That really God in his desire wants a home, and like us, because we're obviously in his image, he wants it now. Now was a long time ago. But he also wants us to be part of the process. Because if he just prefabricated a home, if this world started off, okay, he wants it here and he wants a home and he doesn't want to wait 5,783 years for it, make this world your home. Make this whole world the Garden of Eden. Let's start off that way. No, Adam, Eve, snake story. He could have scripted it differently. It could have been redemption from the very first moment. It could have been, but then we wouldn't have been part of the process. We would have been gifted this world, gifted our role in it, and it would have been very external to us. It would have just been something else handed to us without much meaning and significance for us. So God chose to wait, to allow us to be partners in the process. And now when he has his home, we made it with a lot of sweat and a lot of tears, a lot of work of every single one of us. And therefore we're within the home and we have the whole pleasure, appreciation of redemption as something made with our little hands. The only, metaphor, the obvious metaphor I can give for that would be sort of like, if you give your child whatever, or if you work with them to create it, if you work with them to build it, the pleasure in that Lego, whatever that they built with your help piece by piece, or that a little lumpy, a little burnt, a little uneven cake that they made themselves. It's delicious. It definitely is. They made it themselves. As versus a much more perfect product that was just given to someone that you enjoy, you like, it's great, it's perfect, but it's not yours. That's not the only reason, but it resonates very much inside of me. So that's what I'm sharing in terms of answering that question. But we're going to go back to what I was saying, because that's the perspective of the Rebbe in this chapter, which, of course, this is a very big topic, and therefore there are many things we could wonder. And I'm very open to the questions, because that's what this class is about, hearing your voices. So looking at desire, we unpack that beautifully. Something beyond reason, not something necessarily, but definitely something lacking. For a home, permanent revelation of essence in the lower realm. And Firma and Lisa both questioned in different ways, why does God want to be here specifically? You could also question, why is God discriminating? I mean, he could have the whole creation his home. So they were almost saying, like, why not planet Atzilus? Why here? Which is a very valid question. Or why not everywhere? And actually, by saying he wants his home in the lower realm, he's being exclusive. He does not want his home in planet Atzilus, or Bria, or Yetzira, or Asiya. None of those are going to be his home. That's the truth. When we have the redemption, those levels are not God's home. It'll be good for them too. Obviously, redemption is perfection and good on every level for everything, but not his home. His home is exclusively, the lower realm implies an exclusivity to this physical reality. So Why not there as well? Why not everywhere? And why, of all places, if you want to limit yourself, are you choosing here? All of those are circling around this desire in the lower realm. So now we're going to see how the Rebbe phrases his question, but again, coming from the same point of like here specifically. Of course, the Alter Rebbe takes it a little deeper than us, but it's going in the same direction. It's not even a relevant word by God, this concept of above or versus below. God fills everything equally. If we think about it in a philosophical way, where is God? Everywhere. I think we just said that a few minutes ago. He's everywhere. Everywhere means everywhere in America, everywhere on planet Earth. No, everywhere. All of creation, the highest celestial realms you never heard of, primordial constriction, the first void, and myriads of other terms. And this piece of paper. God is everywhere, and he's everywhere equally. All him. So here's God, where seemingly space is not significant. Meaning in our world, the coordinates of creation, if we would think about it, you don't have to be taught this. If I asked you as a question, I'm sure you would all come up with the answer. The coordinates of creation are time and space. It was, it is, it will be, here, not there, or another place. Time and space are the boxes all of us, all of creation are in every second of existence, except for God. For God, there's no time, and for God, there's no space. When is now? Every second that was, every second that will be, it's all part of the continuum of God's now. Does that make sense to us? No, because we're in the box. How do we understand beyond the box? But I can say it very glibly, and we could like sort of nod. And it's the same with space. Where is God? Everywhere. Everywhere here? No, everywhere. So God, who is everywhere, higher than you can imagine, lower than you can imagine, no limits, wants his home in a very specific space. Physical reality. What's going on? Suddenly you get space specific? You're not space specific. You're beyond space. Space is our box. It's not your box. So if the concept of space isn't even a relevant box for God, why is he boxing his home into one dimension of all the myriad dimensions of creation to understand this? And of course, the answer is going to take a while because it's a deep thought, but we'll get to it. Prior to creation, pre 5,783 years ago, was only God. What was there? God. Yachid u'miyuchad u'mamale kol hamakam hazeh shabara bo ha'olam. God was alone. God that was all there was, and he took up all the space, if you want to use that term space. What was there? God. And there's no and. Where? There's no where. God. Do we understand that? Again, of course we don't understand that. But we can talk about it. So what was there? God. When? There's no when. Where? There's no where. How? There's no how. God. Totally, absolute, thick, intense God. And then he had this desire. V'gam ata. And also now, post this desire, which led to a lot of changes, by God, nothing changed. All there is God. Seems to us there's a big change. True. From the perspective of the recipients, from the perspective of creation, creation was a very significant change. From the perspective of God, no change. Before, all there is him. And now, all there is him. Because everything in creation is him. Of course, these ideas are familiar to people that remember from chapter 21, 22, 23, 20. We discussed them there at length. Shemekablim al-yedei levushim rabim, hamechasim u'mastirim or yisparach. Why does it seem to us that there's such a change? God is saying, there was me, there is me, there will be me. Change. And we're saying, and before there was Atzilus, and before there was this physical reality, and before there was Earth, and before there was America, and before there was me. That's a huge change, me. So God says, I don't see this change at all. All there was me, and all there now is me, and this is all my energy in all of its various forms. So why does it seem so different to us? So the Rebbe says it seems different to us because there's a lot of garments that God put into place for us to exist. Now, these ideas are discussed later in another section of Tanya called Shar HaYichud VeHaEmunah, the gate of oneness and belief, where we go into these ideas in a different way. I mean, more deeply. Obviously, these are the same ideas, not a contrast, but with more explanation and elaboration. But basically, the point being, so God has this desire. He wants a home. For a home, he needs a creation to be his home. For creation to exist, he needs myriads of layers of filters. If you could think, a very simplistic metaphor for this would be if you were going to the Bahamas and you want everyone to know afterwards that you were there and you had a great time and you have that beautiful glow. Well, you're going to put on some type of protection to your skin. You don't want to just burn and peel. You don't want to get in unhealthy rays, but you also want some of the sun to come in. You don't want to put a sun block. So you're going to put on some type of sunscreen, a screen, to allow in the rays that will tan you beautifully and to block the rays that would be harmful, that will cause you to be burned, become sick. Is there only one level of sunscreen on the market? No, there are many levels. Is there 2 or 4 or 6 or 8 or 10 or why? Well, we could say that different skins can absorb the sun differently. Some people have an easier time handling it, and they're going to absorb it better, and they could take in more. And some people can't, and in a second they would burn, and they need a very high protection because their skin is very delicate and very sensitive. So we have the sun, we have the sunshine, we have the rays of the sun. Now we have all these people that want to tan and not burn and not absorb anything unhealthy. And there's many different filters out there. There's many different sunscreens. That's a very simplistic metaphor for God and creation. We want creation. We want creation to survive. We don't want any burns here. We don't want any peeling skin. We don't want any dissolving of its existence. Because if the energy is too strong, we'll cease to exist. 3,300 some years ago, the energy was pretty strong. God revealed himself to us when he gave us the Torah. And about 3 million people died and were revived with the dew of the resurrection of the dead. Why? Because it was a pretty strong revelation of self. Was it the total no barriers, you chucked out your sunscreen? No, of course, there was still plenty of barriers in place, but some were removed. And that was already pretty intense. Imagine if there were none. The world would not exist. Our physical world wouldn't exist. No creation would exist. No angel could handle it. No supernal realm, no Atzilus, nothing could handle God without the filters in place. And therefore, when God created, he used 2 dimensions of self. He used all of his beneficence and love and generosity and giving to create. And he used the discrimination, the withdrawal, the holding back. Because you need both. You need the giving, but we need the filters that we can handle it. The amazing thing is, in this chapter about redemption, as we're going to discuss later in the chapter, that when Mashiach comes, when we have the complete redemption, God won't have any filters. God without any barriers. And we will survive. And we will handle it. How? It's a good question. We'll discuss it later in this chapter. But now we're saying, for God, from his end, there's no change. Go back to what we were discussing at the end of last chapter that we spoke of a few minutes ago, how the sun is impervious to the recipients. And we said that's a very good metaphor for God. The sun shining, if we appreciate it or not, if we want it or not, if we care about it or not, if we're sleeping or up or inside or outside, the sun shines the same. No change for the sun. God is giving. From his end, it's the same. It's him, it's God. It was God, it is God, it will be God. But from our end, we can't handle that straight. So for our benefit, from our perspective, there's layers and layers and layers and layers of filters, not blocks. Blocks wouldn't help us. Blocks means we wouldn't be either. A filter to allow God's kindness to flow, but filtered exactly to the degree of what we can handle. We want the max that we can handle and remain existent. And that's the dynamics of creation. God's giving and God's filtering, the kindness and the strength. And all those filters create for us a sense of change. It's a very different world. But God sees through all those filters. Imagine if you had like a two-way glass. Sometimes a synagogue could have it, right? A glass that's tinted on one side. So let's say you're on one section, let's say you're in the women's section, and you could look down and see, or look through the glass and see the men. But from the men's end, the glass is tinted and they can't see past it and see the women. So from your end, you see it, from their end, they don't. A metaphor. From our end, we just see the tint. We just see the darkness. We can't see through it. But from God's end, it's clear. He sees straight through. So there's no blockage. There's no change. Someone sent up a question that I couldn't catch reading. So what they asked was exactly this question that I said we're going to discuss later in this chapter, which is, how can this be? The more we understand what I just said, the more deeply you can understand what I just said, the more strong is this question. So how can there possibly be the physical when the essence of God? How in the world could physical survive? How in the world could creation survive? How in the world could an angel survive? How in the world could a planet of godliness survive? Nothing could survive. That's a very good question. And that we are going to discuss later in this chapter.